Welcome to the No Shame Podcast. I'm John Groders. Once a year, filmmakers and producers, actors and directors from all over the world gather to be encouraged in the Lord and in their craft at the International Christian Visual Media Conference, or ICVM. We spent the week interviewing many of those who attended for our podcast.
Got no shame, no, we are not afraid, no shame.
Welcome to the No Shame Podcast. I'm John Groders, and we're at ICVM. I have pretty much spent the last 3 hours with you, Andy.
Yeah, we're best friends now. I think let's be roommates or something.
Let's be roommates.
Just make films.
Andy Erwin is our guest, and man, Andy, I have sort of been watching you and your brother John make films from October Baby, and I've seen them all. And now we just came out with a little film this year. Maybe you've heard of it. It's called I Can Only Imagine. And if you're one of the 86 million people who have seen it, then I'm talking to the director, and you're amongst friends here. Do you feel that?
Absolutely. I think the reason why we're excited about events like ICVM is we know what it feels like to kind of be in the middle of the struggle and to try to find your voice as a filmmaker. And I know how much I valued being around filmmakers that were pioneers in this space, and just being able to say, hey, how did you do this or that, and bounce ideas off. So, just to be around, this, next round of talent that's coming up, and being able to encourage them. Hopefully there's bumps in our path and missteps that they can learn from, and we can just be there to be an encouragement to them.
It takes a commitment of your time to be willing, and I'm sure that right now life is, you have a lot of demands on your time, a lot of people pulling on your coattails and pulling. Sure. But Andy's come here. Last year he addressed our group, and I remember I was looking for my notes this morning, and then I was asked today if I would help when Andy was giving an hour and a half talk in a panel. The room was completely packed. There were people sitting on the floor in the back, and it was called, John, will you just interview Andy director to director? And I was really excited to do it. I wanted to learn some things myself. And so Andy's given time today for a panel. He just did the plenary address at our luncheon. He's not even made it to his car, and now he's sitting down for this podcast. I apologize for all of it.
No, it's great. I think that, anytime you get a chance to sit down with another director, there's kind of, instead of there being a heightening of ego, there's a lessening of it, because you've both been in the battle and know what it feels like to sit in the chair. And so it's actually kind of like a massive therapy session where you can just sit there and be like, hey, has this happened? Yeah, this has happened. How do you do this? And, I anytime I can talk to another director, it's always a good day.
Well, we learn from each other, and it's funny. Like, I've been a traveling musician and played all the Christian camps. I was in that Christian rock.
Yeah.
So I knew all the speakers, because every time we're at a camp, I hear a different speaker.
Sure.
I knew none of the other bands because we would be the band. We probably would be able to know a lot about actors and crew chiefs and leaders and studios, but we aren't on set with other directors very often.
Not very often.
You actually made a point in the other room that it's probably a good idea to take time to try to do that. Serve under other people that are directing and humble yourself.
I always try to, get to where I can at least hang out on another director's set, or, at times I even go back to my old ESPN crew to work on the crew. Just because, number one, it helps give you perspective of what it's like to work kind of below the line again, and gives you a healthy respect for what your people go through to really produce your movies. But secondly, it's just massively encouraging. I was on the set the other day with the Kendrick Brothers who are doing their new film down in Columbus, Georgia, and I was on set for just a day just to hang out and encourage Stephen and Alex. And being around other filmmakers that are doing something at a high level, it's just great to eat popcorn and watch the movie coming together, because I love the movie set. And so, yeah, for me, being around other directors, you pick up little tips, and, good artists create, great artists steal. So
Amen.
There's always times where you're like, hey, that's a tip, I'm taking that one. And so it really helps.
Good artists create, great artists steal. I like that. I'm thinking about doing a movie on a hit song.
Go for it, man.
I was trying, in fact, I have it right here.
That's awesome.
Look at this.
I love it. I love it.
The only song bigger in the Christian world in history than I Can Only Imagine is the Star Spangled Banner.
There you go.
So we're going to trump you guys and do the story on the Star Spangled Banner.
Do it.
Kind of controversial.
I love it.
You stand or you kneel or whatever.
Oh my gosh.
I got to do what helped me learn was not school, but was being the behind-the-scenes guy on some movies when I was younger. And the behind-the-scenes guy with the camera, they really want someone to do it. They don't want to pay anybody to do it. And you've got the all-access pass.
Oh, absolutely.
So I wanted to be a director, so I was filming behind the scenes for Bobby Jones' Stroke of Genius with Jim Caviezel, shot in Scotland, and I love golf.
Sure.
You said you used golf, but I would have been playing. But I got to be that camera guy. Well, it was no coincidence I stayed behind Rowdy Harrington the whole time. I mean, I didn't care about what was going on in the makeup room. I wanted to see how he directed and how he worked with the DP and how his conversations would go all day with his script supervisor. If you're a young filmmaker and you want to really get into business and you can get an opportunity to do something like that, I think it's invaluable.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I anytime I'm around, especially a particularly great director, I don't care to talk about myself at all. I just want to absorb. And a lot of people won't teach, but the really good ones will. So, when Hacksaw Ridge was coming out, we got a chance to spend a couple of weeks traveling with Mel Gibson, helping him promote the film, especially my brother, and just having a couple of sit-down, times with him and just picking his brain on how do you direct non-actors in Apocalypto. And he just said, I sit down and I show them the camera, and I shoot kind of some slow motion shots, and I say, look here, look down here, look up here, look over here. And when they do what I do, I bring them over and I show them what it looks like, and I say, look at all the emotions you just communicated. And when they understand what the camera sees, they really relax. And I'm like, that's brilliant. It's brilliant, but that's a Oscar-winning director.
Apocalypto, one of the great movies that many people haven't seen.
Yeah,
it's fantastic.
So all those actors he worked with are fishermen and people that had never acted before. So, anytime I'm around a great director, I just want to pick their brain, and John does too. And we've been privileged to bump into some people that we really respect. And so, and then the other thing I do is there's a Hollywood Roundtable does they do these roundtable discussions with industry professionals that they release during award season, and they do one on directors. And every time it comes out, I watch it like it's a college course, because there's so many things on there that you're like, those are tips that I can use, and it's really helpful.
Write that down if you're driving your car and you're a wannabe director. Take a look at that. Everyone's going to want to hear, but I can only imagine a little bit. And it's not too late to still fascinate people with some stories. Can you just peel back the curtain a little bit on that film? What about that experience did you just feel was like a downhill run? Like this one, you had the wind at your back a little bit this time.
Yeah, I felt kind of guilty in a sense, because typically films don't want to get made, but this one just had the wind in its sails. And so I was really grateful. I kept pinching myself and saying, how has this story not been told, and how in the world did it fall in our lap? And Bart's become one of my best friends that it's based on, Bart Millard, Mercy Me, and we really wanted to do his story justice, and said we want everybody to feel everything you felt over a lifetime in 2 hours. And seeing him watch it for the first time was really a treat. For us, a lot of good stories are intriguing. A lot of stories are marketable, but it very rarely do all those things line up in a true story that has the DNA to make a good movie. And with this one, when we had found out the majority of the story already about the abuse with his father and the redemption story, but we're trying to say, okay, where's the moment that the underdog overcomes it all? We hadn't signed on for it yet, and I was doing a radio interview just like this, and off the air, it was in Tampa. The host asked me, what are you looking at next? And I said, I can only imagine Bart Millard's story off the record. And he said, oh my goodness, I was at the Ryman that night when Amy Grant pulled him up on stage and gave him his song back. And I was like, holy cow, I don't know this story. What happened? So I called Bart. I'm like, did this happen, dude? And he's like, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you guys that.
Hey, buried the lead with you, man.
Yeah, exactly. So at that point, I called my brother. I'm like, dude, I think we have the DNA for a really great movie. So we kind of reverse engineered it from this moment that John kind of came up with, John and Brent McCorkle, the writers, and this idea that when the camera rotates around him at the end of the song, that like heaven is on the other side of the room,
right?
And he sees his father standing there in approval, and it's a beautiful moment, and it just made for a really great movie.
this is totally inappropriate to ask you, but was that Amy Grant in the film? How the heck did you do that?
No, it looked like her a lot.
A lot.
Yeah. So, we felt like we were trying to decide: do we cast the real musicians like Amy Grant, Michael W. Smith, and all these people? Do we cast them in real life, the real people, and de-age them or something?
Exactly.
But if you do that, you have to kind of commit across the board. And we knew we wanted to have somebody play Bart. We had found John Michael, and so we felt like we needed to kind of nail the essence of the people, but we didn't want it to be like a straight-over imitation. So we started the casting session, and I started out my music video career directing music videos for Michael W. Smith and Amy Grant. So whenever anybody came in to read for Amy, I just was like, I just want to tell you up front, I'm sorry. Amy's a dear friend, and I'm going to be extra critical because you've got to be Amy. And so all these actors came in, and my casting director, Bev Holloway, had gotten a lot of people in there. But then all of a sudden, this actress, Nicole Duport, came in, actress from Canada. She lives in LA now. And she had crafted the character. She had worked on the little crooked smile. She got her presence, her way that she's still and effortless. And I just sat there just in amazement. I'm like, I feel like I'm spooked out. I'm really weirded out. So it was amazing.
You kind of fooled me. And we saw Gary Chapman last night singing out at the Johnny Cash Ranch, and I've kind of not liked him for a long time because he took Amy off the market back in the day. He understands that. He did that to a lot of us. But when you put the young Amy Grant on the screen, I was 18 years old again, and that's incredible. So that was just a look-alike actress.
And Amy, to her credit, anybody that's known Amy for an amount of time has a profound amount of respect for her. That she is, out of all the Christian artists I've worked with, the most that epitomizes the love of Christ to her core is Amy Grant. So when I heard the story about it, I'm like, of course she gave the song back. That's Amy Grant. That's what she does. And so to be able to kind of let her come up and take a bow, even though she was the last person that would want to, I felt like we brought honor to a person that deserves it. And Amy absolutely deserves it. She's the real deal.
Yeah. Well, you certainly touched on a lot of us who were there in those years, the 80s, the 90s, the early 2000s, in addition to a much, much wider audience. But even for the ICVM people, Christian people, that was powerful. So you have explained to me today that you guys have found a lane where, how do you put it, our movies don't preach.
Yeah, we kind of found our calling. Early on when we talked to Alex Kendrick, he encouraged us to get in the game. He just said, don't try to be us. Find what God's called you to do and do it. And so for years, we were trying to find what's our lane. And I think when we did Woodlawn and we saw the power of a true story, we felt like it's the ability to showcase the power of the gospel allows it to emotionally engage the person to ask the right questions. So we found that if you have the right story, what John and I feel called to do is we don't feel called to preach. We feel called to enable preachers to preach. That we do a movie that is an icebreaker that allows the right questions to be asked, that if we've emotionally moved somebody with the power of showing redemption in action like we did with Imagine, then afterwards that person will seek out answers. And then they look for either a preacher or somebody from a church is able to take that person out for coffee to say, hey, what'd you think of that movie? And instantly you're in a conversation and you can fill in the rest of the. So it's kind of like a volleyball match. I can't spike a volleyball, but back in the day when I was younger and lighter, I could set the heck out of a volleyball, and that just for somebody else to spike. And I feel like the local church and your local pastors, they're the people that are called to kind of do the more glamorous thing and spike the volleyball and reap the harvest. We're just there to set it for the church and enable the preachers to preach.
He's shared some stories today, and this is just, if you're listening to this podcast, wherever you have found it, and someone has set that volleyball for you, you've seen I Can Only Imagine, or you've taken your brother or your friend, you're the preacher, and you have the chance to say, that story of redemption is a true story. Yeah. And if you're afraid to do that, one of the things Andy said is, he has to get to a point where he has to realize he can't make this movie great. It's going to be God's glory. And he has to come to some freedom in that. Go ahead and be willing to take the swing at the spike. Close the deal that these movie makers have teed up for us. Have the courage to do it. What's the worst thing that can happen? nothing. And what's the best thing that can happen? It's the most loving thing we could ever do for people is to offer them the love of Christ. So don't waste the chance if you see I Can Only Imagine to share it and spec the volleyball. Andy, thank you for your extra time today. This guy is amazing.
John,
at
you're a treat,
supporting
man.
movies.
Really loved it, my friend.
Have no shame, no, we are not afraid, no shame of the gospel of His name. It's the power of God by which we all are saved. We need not be afraid. No shame of the gospel of His name. It's the power of God by which we all are saved. We need not be afraid.